My journey as a Superman fan started with a tattered red cape blowing in the wind. That ending rocketed me forward like a red-blue blur through a decade-long origin story and poignant tales of self-discovery and now fatherhood, and backward to the character's very beginnings. Now, on this podcast, we journey together across time and media to examine the stories that have defined the Man of Steel. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Thy Kingdom Come from Justice Society of America by Geoff Johns, Alex Ross, and Dale Eaglesham is returning guest, fan favorite, Rich Roney. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me, and I'm thrilled to be here. Looking forward to it.
So this is the second episode in a two-parter looking at the Kingdom Come Superman. Last week, Bernie and I talked about the original classic 4-issue Kingdom Come miniseries. We also had a great talk about Brandon Routh's turn as the Donnerverse / Kingdom Come Superman in television's Crisis. And in this episode, like I said, we'll take a look at the most substantial sequel to Kingdom Come, which was this Justice Society of America storyline that spanned Justice Society of America numbers 10 through 22, plus an annual and 3 specials. So it was quite the lengthy, sprawling story. We'll also touch on, at least briefly, The Kingdom, the less well-received, less well-regarded sequel that Mark Waid wrote just a couple of years after Kingdom Come. I know you did not reread that. I did reread the main 2-issue miniseries, so we'll at least touch on that and acknowledge that story's place within the Kingdom Come mythology. But primarily, we're talking about this Justice Society story. But before we dive into that, I mean, let me just ask you, I know you did not reread Kingdom Come for this episode. And like I said, we talked about it last time, but just generally speaking, I mean, what is your experience with Kingdom Come? Is it something that you go back to regularly? Is it something you kind of read once when it came out? Like what is your history with Kingdom Come itself?
I loved it when it came out. I mean, it really galvanized, it captured me and captured my interest intensely. I thought it was stunning and fascinating for its time. I've gone back to it, but I haven't read it, beginning to end. I've found a book here and there, and I've read parts of it. I loved it more because, for some of the themes we're going to tap into. One, I've always loved the older Superman. So I loved that Superman from Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Superman with the graying temples. I loved that older version. I especially loved what Ross and Waid did, where by virtue of what he experienced in his life, the murder of Lois and her death, and then how society kind of turned on him, and they didn't espouse his values, and they embraced Magog. The fact that he turned his back on humanity, it's very, very understandable. It showed how human he was, but he really severed his relationship with humanity and withdrew. So I loved that whole story about him re-entering the environment, but I also loved the dynamic of both Wonder Woman and Batman. Each kind of, you see the evolution of Wonder Woman becoming more militant, and there was some very heated debates between the three of them, and I just thought that was fantastic. Right
on. Yeah, I echo that, and like I said, Bernie and I, we had a pretty thorough discussion, I think. We got into some really interesting questions and ideas about faith in the DC universe and within this world populated by all these super beings, and the sin of Superman in that story of inaction, right? And it was really interesting, but it's great to get your take on that as well. And I'll just talk for a moment about The Kingdom, which was Mark Waid's, Alex Ross was not involved, but Mark Waid's follow-up. I believe it was 98, so just a couple of years after Kingdom Come. Again, I know you did not reread that for this. You have read it, though, in the past, correct?
Oh, yes. My memory is that Waid took the lead. There was a strong story that really focused on Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. It was kind of a surprise ending, if my memory serves, where, if I'm fumbling this, but was Superman and Wonder Woman's son the Phantom Stranger? I don't know, but there was kind of a Superman with silver hair, and then there were 5 independent one-offs.
Yeah, I mean that's the gist of it. And like I said, typically not held up, certainly in the esteem that Kingdom Come is, but I don't think even to the extent that Thy Kingdom Come is. But it has its place. Most notably, I suppose, it introduced the concept that Mark Waid and Grant Morrison had developed of hypertime, right? So this was a few years before we would get Infinite Crisis and the return of the proper multiverse. And so for this period of time, we had this notion of hypertime, which basically was allowed for alternate timelines and realities. And it was a way for DC to sort of, for all of the stories that had previously been wiped out by Crisis to still exist and have a place. And I thought it was actually a cool idea and relatively, elegant in its simplicity. And unfortunately, it never really seemed to catch on. The only other big instance that I can think of where a story really utilized it, there was a Superboy storyline in his solo series where he was bouncing around hypertime and different realities, and he was fighting Black Zero in one of them. And
I think Tom Grummett did the artwork on that. It was a 3 or 4 part story where I remember one cover was like Superboy and 25 other variations of Superboy all on the cover. And like you said, Black Zero was the villain. I think that's when he was at Project Cadmus and he kind of partnered with the Challengers. I also think, if I may, Morrison in Batman, with that whole thing about the black casebook, he kind of took the position that all the crazy stories of the Silver Age did in fact in some way happen. But I think he made it more a consequence of Batman being exposed to the Scarecrow fear toxin and maybe hallucinating. I'm fumbling on that because I only know my sum total of my knowledge is from CBR and periodically seeing what Brian Cronin writes.
Gotcha. So in any event, hypertime was definitely one major takeaway from the Kingdom story. But the basic premise of it was that we meet Gog, right? The character who will eventually beget Magog in Kingdom Come. But we meet Gog, and he is introduced as a survivor of the destruction of Kansas in Kingdom Come. And he grows up initially worshiping Superman, and then comes to learn, Superman discusses with him his role in the events that led to the destruction of Kansas, the fact that he had stepped away. And so this young man really turns on him and becomes this twisted figure who then travels through time and keeps killing Superman over and over, one day earlier. And eventually the Kingdom Come, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman travel back to what is our present, like the present of the DC universe, and meet their present day counterparts. And I guess the one other interesting aspect of it, and it ties in with the hypertime idea, is that obviously Kingdom Come was this Elseworld story outside of continuity, but in the Kingdom, it's really presented as the future of the DC universe. But when the Kingdom Come, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman travel back to the present day, they have now changed the timeline. And so the Kingdom Come Earth is now splintered off into its own reality, its own timeline within hypertime. So
okay. Is that Earth 22?
Well, Earth 22, it would get that official designation after Infinite Crisis. It was during the 52 weekly series where after Infinite Crisis, the multiverse has been reborn, and now the Kingdom Come Earth has the official designation of Earth 22.
Gotcha. Okay.
So again, I think with the Kingdom, the idea of the Kingdom Come versions and the present day versions meeting each other, and this concept of hypertime, I think those were really the big takeaways of that. Like I said, I reread the main 2-issue miniseries. It was okay, but you really do appreciate just how important that painted artwork really is in terms of bringing you into that world. And, we'll talk about this when we get more into the actual Justice Society story. But, in that, any time that we view the Kingdom Come Earth, it's Alex Ross's painted pages. So it really goes a long way towards, really creating a very distinct identity for that specific reality. So in any event, that was the Kingdom. And then one other thing that I don't think you ever read, but correct me if I'm wrong, did you read the Chuck Austen run on Action Comics, like right before Infinite Crisis?
I think I saw a cover where Magog was fighting Superman, but I could be wrong. I did not read it. So it's Gog. It's the character who then
emerges in the Justice Society story that we read. And remember, our Superman talks about having fought a character, someone named Gog.
Yes. Okay.
So that was, they introduced just a sort of a modern day non-Kingdom Come version of the character. He was a missionary who developed these powers and sort of lost his mind. And again, they recount his origin in what we read, but that story had introduced him to the DC universe.
Gotcha.
That Action Comics run is not one I would necessarily be revisiting for this podcast. I don't hold it up very highly. I don't think many fans do, but I did read it at the time, and I remember when they brought in that character. But in any event, just to sort of lay out before we get to this Justice Society story, we had a couple of instances of, aspects of Kingdom Come being utilized in other stories.
Okay. And I will confess, Anthony, I loved Kingdom Come. And like you said, the Ross's artwork was so powerful. But also, like you said, his theme of religion and faith, and the fact, like I said, that you've got these heated debates and philosophical conflict between Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. And that was conveyed so well in the story and especially in the artwork. But as I read this Justice Society thing, I do have to confess, I did get confused between when Gog is the missionary, right? And then the, I guess, third world Gog appears. And then later on, Magog appears. But Magog has the same costume as the original missionary. It just kind of got me a little confused.
No, I understand. Well, hopefully we'll straighten everything out as we move forward here. So let's jump into this Thy Kingdom Come arc. And one of the main reasons I wanted to have, really the main reason I wanted to have you in particular for this episode, is that you're probably the biggest Justice Society fan I know. And it's something that you and I have talked about a lot over the years. For me, my introduction to the JSA was that late 90s revival by initially David Goyer and James Robinson, and then Robinson stepped away and Geoff Johns stepped in and co-wrote the book with David Goyer for many years, and then eventually took over solo. And then after Infinite Crisis, JSA ended and Geoff Johns launched Justice Society of America, the series that we're talking about now. But so that late 90s revival, I mean, that was really my entry point to these characters. But how far does it go back for you?
It's, I would say, without doubt, one of the first 4 comic books I ever purchased after World's Finest was that summer's, I guess it was Justice League of America 28 or 29. It was the second team up between the JLA and the JSA. So I was going back to these guys to 1964, and I've always loved the this. I kind of stammer and babble, but I've always loved the Justice Society in all their iterations. I mean, there was an earlier thing in the early 90s. Len Struczewski and Mike Parobeck did like a short arc. They did 2 arcs, and for whatever reason, DC canceled it. It was almost it was kind of stealing Showtime away from the Justice League. But I remember that Mike Parobeck did the artwork, and it was only 8 or 9 issues each of the 2 runs. So these poor guys have been like exiled and thrown off into limbo far too often. I came in with trepidation, just like you. I loved that 90s revival. And I think it ran 85 issues, 87 issues, something like that. But there were so many arcs in there that I loved. The Princes of Darkness, The Return of Hawkman, Lightning Strikes, Injustice Be Done. I thought that was just a stunning, well-executed run on the characters. And I think many of those stories hold up well today.
For sure. For this, in addition to Thy Kingdom Come, I did reread the first arc from the Justice Society of America series, The Next Age. And I skipped over, after Thy Kingdom Come, there was a 4-part Black Adam ISIS story. I skipped over that, but I did read Geoff Johns' final issue on the title, which is a Stargirl Spotlight. So I've now reread almost the entirety of the Geoff Johns run on Justice Society of America. I haven't gone back to the JSA series in many years, but, like yourself, I remember that so fondly. And the thing is, I was thinking about this. I know for fans like yourself who saw the ebbs and flows with the prominence of the Justice Society of America, that revival probably had more of an impact. For me, what was funny was that, I've talked about this before, the late 90s was when I really started branching out as a reader beyond the Superman books. So the absence of the JSA prior to that wasn't something that I really was aware of, to be honest. So I remember, and I don't know it's funny because I don't know what it was at the time that necessarily grabbed me about it, but I remember when the JSA stuff started coming out and they did that Justice Society of America Returns event that led up to it. But
Yes.
whatever it was, it captured my attention, and I didn't know. I mean, I knew next to nothing about all of the history. I think the main exposure that I had to the characters was in Zero Hour, which they did not fare well in that. And in Grant Morrison's JLA, there was the Crisis Times 5 arc that introduced Jakeem Thunder, if I'm recalling this correctly, and utilized a number of the JSA characters. So I had very limited exposure to the characters and definitely hadn't felt their absence. But man, I was on board from the start with that JSA series. And I think what has always resonated with me about the characters, I really love the sense of history and legacy. I think the notion of these mystery men banding together in the dark days of World War II is really cool. I like the idea that, to at least some extent, they serve as some measure of inspiration to Superman himself, even when he's, starting out, and the fact that there had been these costumed crime fighters previously. I think that's kind of a neat touch. But I think that more than anything, it was the end of the Return of Hawkman storyline from that JSA series. It was JSA 25, and Carter Hall has now reunited with the surviving founders, Ted, Alan, and Jay, and they're talking on the rooftop about their role, their place in the DC universe. And it's Jay he looks down at the people on the street. He's like, the people down there, they look up to the Titans and the League, but the Titans and the League look up to us. And Alan says, who watches the Watchmen? And I always like that idea of this different, they're not just another team. They really have a very special, specific place. And in the first arc of this Justice Society of America series, the one before Thy Kingdom Come, it begins post Infinite Crisis with Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman coming to the founders of the JSA and saying, we need better heroes. We need you to really train the next generation. And Batman has a line where he says, the League is a strike force, but the society is a family. And in that Next Age storyline, and it continues into Thy Kingdom Come, you really see them building up this idea of them as a family, as a society, as something more than, again, something akin to a strike force. So I think for me, that's what's always resonated with me about these characters. Similar for you, different? What is it for you?
I was hanging on every word, and I agree with you. The other aspect that I find interesting, if I may, really prior to this revitalization of the Justice Society with Goyer and Geoff Johns, or Goyer and Robinson, and like we said, what did it run, 7 or 8 years, close to that? It was like 87 issues. Prior to that, if you look at Marvel, almost every superhero is the same age. They're all contemporaries. And prior to Justice Society coming in and that Goyer, Geoff Johns run, it was really the Justice League and the Teen Titans. But here, all of a sudden, you had more of this reflection of generations, right? You had the Justice Society, you had the Justice League, you had the Teen Titans, you had Young Justice. So you had this generational aspect of things where all of a sudden you could have an older, clearly very vital Alan Scott and Jay Garrick and Ted Grant and Hawkman, and they were teachers, right? So that generational aspect, I think the whole concept of legacy really started, I don't know when, but it started, I would say, just about, JSA in the mid-20s, exactly like you said, 25 or the Return of Hawkman. That generational aspect, kind of that element kicked in. Well
said. So one thing that we have to touch on before we really get into the meat of Thy Kingdom Come.
I know where this is going.
Do you? Because this, maybe you do, because this has been a long time running joke between you and I and a number of the others from our old comic shop, Alternate Realities, the sort of the prologue issue to Thy Kingdom Come features a scene that I would have never thought twice about. I would have read it and said, oh, that's cute and fun, and I never would have thought of it again. And I'm referring to the pancake breakfast at the firehouse, which, audience, and I'm going to ask him to explain in a moment, but Rich Roney has abhorred this scene. He detests this scene. I can't tell you how many times he has cited this as a low point for the Justice Society. The fact that they would dare have a pancake breakfast at the firehouse for 5 pages for years. How many years has it been since this came out? Rich still talks about it. Right now, Rich, on the record, for what is the problem with the pancake breakfast?
Boy, I should have seen this coming, and shame on me. Shame on me.
Oh, is that not what you thought I was going to say?
No, that's exactly what I thought. That's precisely. That's exactly it. But I should have been prepared. Okay, two things, and I'll try to keep this crisp. But that second run by Geoff Johns, I really think, to me, did not hold up as well as any of the stories in the first run. I also thought that 5-page spread in that early issue, and I think at the very, very, very end of that issue is when Starman opens the portal to get rid of Goth, and it lets the Earth-22 Superman enter. But it just struck me as kind of a schmaltzy Norman Rockwell type thing, right? I think they, I think it was caricatures. So like I vaguely remember like Citizen Steel, all his nieces and nephews hanging all over him, and pots and pans and eggs and batters all over the place. I just thought it was kind of a saccharine, cheap take on Norman Rockwell. And I know I remember sitting across at dinner with you at Mickey Spillane's once, and I was getting excited about in Smallville how the Justice Society was going to appear. And I remember telling you, I go, they better not have a pancake breakfast. And I just remember the laughter on your part going, geez, Rich, you got a lot on your mind, huh?
Yeah, it's funny to me. I mean, look, your point is well taken, and I appreciate the thought that you put into that. It's not, I understand it's not just some arbitrary thing. I mean, I would say for my part, I like it. I feel like it. Yeah, I mean, is it a little schmaltzy? Sure, but I think it shows more of a human side, a little bit of downtime in between, big arcs and big battles. It shows their community involvement, and the reason why they were at the firehouse was in the prior issue they had. I'm already blanking on this, but is it Vandal Savage? Was it that arc? I might be I might be mixing some stuff up, but basically, I think it was Wildcat and his son were fighting a villain, and they pushed the villain out into the street.
I think it was Vandal Savage,
and the villain got struck by the fire truck, and that's how they saved the day. So that was the connection to the fire station. So it worked well enough for me, but yeah, that's been the running joke between the two of us and among a number of us from our comic shop for years. That Rich, listen, in my neighborhood a few months back, we're right across the street from us is our local fire station. We were there not too long ago for an Easter egg hunt with our son, and a few months ago we saw a sign for pancake breakfast, and my wife said, "Oh, should we go?" I said, "No." I said, "We don't do that." I said, "We don't go to Firehouse pancake breakfast." I was like, "Rich would not like that." She's like, "Why?" I was like, he doesn't like, do you like pancakes? You do like pancakes, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes,
So you like pancakes. I'm sure you support firefighters. You love the Justice Society. You just don't like them all together. That's right.
If I think it could have been done differently. That's probably the most diplomatic way. And I'm not ignorant to, like you said, the sense of community. Especially when you look at like Jay and Alan and Ted, and I'm gonna bring this up when we discuss more of Thy Kingdom Come. It harkens back to that spirit of community and that spirit of taking care of community that harkens back to the World War II generation. So all the elements you voiced, the sense of community, protecting people. Yeah, all those things are good. I just kind of, for whatever it was, I'll also say I really didn't warm up at all to that second run on Justice Society. To me, the stories were not as strong or as well executed as the earlier run in the mid '90s.
I understand. Like I said, I have not reread the '90s series, but I did reread almost all of the John's run on the second series, and I would say that it held up better than I remembered it at the time, because I think you and I were very much on the same page of feeling like, this doesn't live up to the prior series. So I think for me overall, I came away from this reading project with a more favorable view of that follow-up series. I know one of the things that, we talked about at the time, this was a big part of the series, especially that first arc, The Next Age, the Justice Society, again, with these marching orders from the Justice League, not marching orders, but, request to, really work on building up this next generation of heroes. They embark on this huge recruitment drive where they start tracking down the bloodlines, the legacies of prior Justice Society members. And so we get this rather large influx of new members to the team. And I think that's maybe a place where your mileage may vary, right? Because if you really have more of an attachment to the older characters, they do have to cede a fair amount of the spotlight in these stories. And it was a lot. There was a lot of new characters who were being introduced. Was that part of what hindered your enjoyment a little bit? Was that the wave of new characters?
Yes. I mean, I'm not opposed to, and I think again, the earlier run, I was more impressed with how they handled it. Like when they introduced Rick Tyler, and I remember like Jakeem and Rick Jakeem helped him get settled in the Brownstone. So I was more with earlier introductions of legacy characters. I thought here, and again, they had the request from the Justice League to do what they were doing. But it just seemed like all of a sudden they grabbed so many characters. I mean, you had Tommy Bronson, you had Judo Master, you had Amazing Man, you had Mr. America, Lightning. Am I missing anyone?
Damage.
I was surprised, to be very candid. I was surprised that they didn't speak to like Jesse Quick, or Kate Spencer, Manhunter. I thought it would have been intriguing had those characters been approached to become members of the Justice Society. It just intrigued me that they did bring in those other 6 characters, but clearly you could make an argument that Kate Spencer, I mean, her grandfather was Al Pratt. I think her grandmother was Sandra Knight, who was the cousin of the first Starman. And then also Jesse Quick. I thought that would have been intriguing.
She's Liberty Bell, no?
Okay. But was she Liberty Bell at that time? And I'm showing my ignorance. I guess she was. You're correct.
Yeah, she features prominently in that.
No, you're right. You're right. To me, I never solidified that connection.
Gotcha.
So shame on me. Yeah.
No, all good. But the Kate Spencer thing, that would have been interesting, especially since Kate had the Manhunter series and everything, so was floating around the DCU at the time. So,
and also the Al Pratt.
Sure, for sure. So, Thy Kingdom Come in this storyline, which again spanned a good baker's dozen number of issues. The Starman from the future, who has become part of the Justice Society, creates a black hole to stop this supervillain from exploding, and inadvertently creates this black hole that brings the Kingdom Come Superman to our Earth. And over the course of the story arc, the Kingdom Come Superman is his quest really is to prevent this Earth from following the same path that led his Earth to destruction. And in this story, he's been plucked from his Earth like right as the atom bomb has detonated. So as far as he knows, there's nothing and no one left on his world. He thinks that he is once again the last survivor of his homeworld. And as events start to unfold, the arrival of Gog, who is killing villains who purport to be deities, the arrival of that Gog, and then the god Gog, who will eventually create Magog. He's seeing all of these events take place that seem to be creating the scenario that led to the chaos on his Earth. And so that, certainly creates the main source of conflict for him. And, there's a lot more for us to unpack, but that's, as far as the Kingdom Come of it all, and specifically the Kingdom Come Superman, that's his role. I guess one of the biggest questions that I wanted to ask you is, and I could probably guess the answer, but do you feel that the Justice Society was the right vehicle if we're going to bring in the Kingdom Come Superman to the DC universe? Do you feel like the Justice Society is the appropriate vehicle within which to do so?
That is a fantastic question. The intriguing aspect is the fact that here you had Power Girl, right? And her love and the pain she experienced with the death, probably 2 or 3 years earlier with in Infinite Crisis, the Earth 2 Superman. I think, though, so you got that connection. I think, I'm convinced that Alex Ross wanted to do a little interlude where he could flesh out some of the things about the Earth 22 Superman, but not do it in any way that would be contradictory to the original story. So I think two things dovetailed here. You got, clearly, Alex Ross loves the JSA. I mean, how many covers did he do where he just did the profile of one individual character? So he has a great love for the JSA. Geoff Johns has a great love for the JSA. But I do think I think I might have told this in one of our Sunday discussions. I think it would have been much more interesting if they had put the Earth 22 Superman in the midst of a different team. It might have been more dynamic. But I don't know. It might have been pretty hard to tell a story if he were hanging out with the Justice League. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I thought about as I was reading this, and I ultimately, we'll talk about how much we liked this or didn't like this story. I think for me, I'll say this, and obviously we'll get into this more. Overall, I enjoyed this arc, and I enjoyed it more now probably than I did the first time around. But I think this was a case of more the setup being better than the payoff is sort of the way I feel about this story. But within that, there was a lot that I liked. But I do think that this was the right team to make the Kingdom Come Superman a part of, because I think thematically it really lines up very nicely with what was going on in Kingdom Come. The fact that you had this new generation of superpowered beings, of supposed superheroes, who were reckless, who were irresponsible, who didn't take care with the people and places around them. And obviously, it culminates in this war between Superman and the old guard, his contemporaries who have returned, and this new breed. Some fall in line with him, but a lot don't. They have to imprison them in this gulag. There's the breakout. So I think it made sense thematically to tie it into Justice Society, which is all about this idea of legacy and training the next generation. And so, if we're thinking about, well, okay, what would be the building blocks to getting to that Kingdom Come scenario, it is this next generation not having the guidance that they should have. So the fact that here's a team dedicated to that cause, I think that works. And I also think that since we are dealing with an older Superman, I think that lends itself nicely by pairing him up with characters like Ted and Alan and Jay. Although one of the things that was a big disappointment for me, I think, with this is I wish they had more interaction. I feel like, Kingdom Come Superman, he has a few interactions with Cyclone, one of the younger heroes, and it's great, and that works in and of itself. But I think I probably would have enjoyed a little bit more of him with the old guard, because I think that's one of the advantages of it would have been a different dynamic than when our Superman interacts with them. Well,
if I can offer this. One thing that impressed me, and I thought was well done, and if you don't want me to, you at the very, very, very end of the story, when they're kind of having their final confrontation with Gog, I really liked how it was really Alan and Jay and the Earth 22 Superman that all had the same perception, the same mindset, where they were kind of pushing back And one of them was saying, like, look, you cannot demand worship. You cannot demand servitude. You just can't do that. So you did see this alignment and this same kind of collective perception. And I think it, again, harkened back to the World War II, generation where they fought for freedom. But the three of them, Alan and Jay and the Earth 22 Superman, all had the same perception. They pushed back on Gog. So I didn't think about it till you said it. It probably was more alignment, the fact that they all were effectively, older. They were not the prime. Yeah, I agree with you.
So let's take a really quick commercial break, and then we will continue our discussion. We'll be right back. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere, via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I was fortunate enough to have my work shown at these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and currently under new ownership, Moose sells a wide selection of new and old comics from every publisher, action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP, that's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions, to save 10% on your order, and it helps support the show. Thank you. And we're back. So let me ask you, and I know we had talked about this a little bit off mic and in our what's up?
Can I come back? You brought this up just a couple of minutes ago, and I do want to hit
Sure.
it. So, as you said, one of the compelling elements of Kingdom Come was, again, as I said earlier, Superman rejected humanity. He rejected society. He withdrew completely. And that was a result of the murder of Lois, and then also the fact that the values that he espoused were not honored at all by society. They loved Magog because he killed the Joker. So he completely withdrew. And then this violent, reckless, irresponsible, just very, very indulgent, indifferent to humanity, super beings came in and they just fought. They didn't care about collateral damage at all. What I wondered is, as the Earth 22 Superman spent time with the Justice Society, and to your point, they were in their teaching mode. They were trying to cultivate and build the character of better heroes. I wonder, my conclusion is Superman was simultaneous, but also it might have amplified his own sense of remorse because he didn't do more in his own world, and that fostered this environment of recklessness and violence. So I think in the same time, he might have looked at them with admiration and being impressed with them, and it might have amplified his own sense of remorse for a lack of action or inattentiveness on his part.
Oh, I mean, I think that's the whole point of this. You were breaking up for a second there, but I think we all got the gist of what you were saying. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think from the perspective of Kingdom Come Superman, and we talked about this when we covered Kingdom Come itself, is that Kingdom Come isn't the story of injustice, right? Where Lois dies and Superman puts a hole through the Joker's chest and then continues down this dark path. It's not that, right? In the Kingdom Come story, he still holds true to his values and his ideals, but like you said, the people around him don't, right? They fall in line with this the more violent alternative in Magog and others like him. And so, Superman's sin in that story isn't giving into darkness, but it's giving up, right? And so I think that's what's so interesting when he comes to this earth. He has seen now the consequences of his inaction, and when he returned, how difficult it was to try to right the ship. And like we said, he comes into this world thinking all is lost on his world. So he's thinking that the consequences of his inaction were the ultimate consequence. So as events are unfolding here, he sees this, Anthony, I'm sure, as an opportunity to act, right? To take the opposite approach that he did the last time and stop events from leading to what he saw in his world.
Yeah. And to your point, I remember early in the first trade, there was, I think, a brief page or two where Earth 22 Superman speaks to Kara. He kind of startles her. And he's convinced his world is gone. It was destroyed. And he kind of says, this is my new world. I want to make it work. And maybe we can each kind of be family. I thought that was a touching moment.
Yeah, for sure. So I know, you and I speak on the phone usually on weekends. And so I know we've been talking as you've been making your way through the reading assignment for this. So, I have a sense of where you ultimately landed on this, but let me ask first, what were the expectations going in? Because I know you had read this when it was originally published, but I know it had been a long time, or you had not read the whole thing.
No, I was very, I bounced around. I was very sporadic. Quite frankly, some of those, I didn't even pick up some of those early issues, like when they introduced Judo Master, or Lance Corporal David Reed, who was FDR's grandson or something. That really turned me off. So I was a lukewarm fan. There was one cover I loved. I forget what issue it was, but it was and I always get confused. Is it Earth Prime or New Earth? The New Earth Superman is looking down on the Earth 22 Superman. It was an Alex Ross cover. I thought, wow, and it was reminiscent of a panel in Kingdom Come. They just had different characters in different positions. So I did not read the whole thing, and I'm glad I read it. I had all three trades, and I worked through beginning to end. I'll let you question me on some of my thoughts here and there as we go through it.
Well, no, I guess so. So since you were reading most of this for the first time, I guess what were the expectations going in, and were they met or not?
Am I glad I read this? Absolutely, I'm glad I read it. Did I pick up on certain perspectives that I never would have otherwise? Definitely. But my own view, and I don't mean to hit the conclusion, we can touch on elements and moments. I kind of think this thing ran too long. I think it ran too long. I also think a flaw in it was the fact that you really only had three key characters. You had Gog, you had Earth 22 Superman, you had the Justice Society. You really didn't see any other villains fighting the Justice Society, in essence. To your point, I think it would have been more interesting if they took a page from the Gardner-Fox very first ever All-Star Justice Society team where they broke into small teams, and that might have fostered more of a dynamic. Here, my sense was it was the entire team just watching Gog walk across the Congo. I think it would have been more interesting from a dynamic character perspective if they had broken it into smaller groups and you could see discussions. There were one or two, like when Superman confronts Magog in one of the brownstone rooms and kind of tells him, hey, look, be careful about the future, do the right thing. But I don't think there was enough of that. I think this was just really constrained to three primary characters, and I don't know if it had the punch. So my expectations coming in were I love the older Superman. I've always loved the older Superman. And I've always loved the Justice Society. And while there's elements of this that I really, really appreciate thematically, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities. And I don't think this story holds up as well as some of the earlier JSA stories.
That's, I mean, fair enough. Do you think that, so, this tries, I guess, to be both a Justice Society story, but also a follow-up to Kingdom Come. Do you think it suffers from trying to be both? Like, is it a better Justice Society story than it is a Kingdom Come Superman story, or vice versa, or does it not really work totally in either respect?
Okay, I think DC had two objectives, or Alex Ross and Geoff Johns had two objectives. I truly think this is more of a Superman story, Earth 22 Superman story, than it is a Justice. It's just in the environment of the JSA that it takes place. But I think their objectives were, I think Alex Ross wanted to revisit this story and do an interlude in such a way that he could expand on the background, especially like the death of Lois and how it impacted Superman at the time. But I don't think he wanted to do anything that would run contradictory to the original story. I think that was one. He wanted to tell this story, but just circle back, and they did it brilliantly from a timing standpoint. I think the other thing DC wanted to do was they really wanted to build up the team, expand the team, and set it up such that there were two ongoing series running concurrently. So I think that was the other backdrop of this. I think, in my mind, I think those were the two objectives.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, when you mentioned that there were, other than Gog, we really didn't have a third-party antagonist in this story. But I think, I mean, I guess that was deliberate, right? Because so much of this came down to the splinter within the team, right? And that's the thing, is initially I remember reading those first few issues of The Next Age, and they were, introducing all these new characters, and it's like, where are we going with this? But I guess ultimately that is where we were going, and why they beefed up the ranks so much, and especially with these newer characters who were more of a blank slate, where when we have this split, and some of them go with Gog and some of them don't, you can get on board with the idea that especially some of these newbies would. But what's funny, I actually feel the opposite about what this story really is. But your point is well taken, but I feel like really this is a Justice Society story, but I feel like Kingdom Come Superman is so popular and looms so large that you sort of think it's more of a Superman story than it is. And I don't know, I feel like there certainly has a key part to play, but, and I mean, I don't know, and I'd be curious to hear, from audience members. I feel like if you go in looking to read this as a Kingdom Come sequel, it's probably not as satisfying as if you go in to it with the perspective of, okay, it's like a modern day Justice Society story with elements of Kingdom Come. And obviously, certainly the Kingdom Come Superman is a major element, but I think that's probably, I think that's kind of where I ultimately land on it. But,
Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I think was a missed opportunity was early in the overall story, when Earth 22 Superman is sitting at the conference table in the JSA headquarters in the Brownstone, and I guess Ma Hunkel took his suit to get it cleaned or whatever, and he's kind of hanging out in the robe and just having tea. And they kind of lock him in there because, as they say, hey, the last time a Superman appeared here, there was a lot of mess, a lot of chaos. And you could see he was, his world was just destroyed. He had gone through the whole experience of withdrawing from society and then going back in and trying to right the ship. So he was disillusioned, demoralized, disoriented. The JSA is also apprehensive. Like, they brought in the Justice League to do the DNA checks and all that stuff. What I think would have been interesting would have been, in one of the early issues, Judo Master is I think attacked by some superhero or superpowered assassins. And my memory is there's one panel where Superman takes one of the Japanese assassins who's able to blow himself up and then reassemble his parts. But Superman talks to him in Japanese. And Anthony, I thought of you because you introduced me to this, but this was a Superman that was willing to threaten, right? He speaks to the guy in Japanese and goes, "Hey, I know what your trick is. You explode and then you reassemble your body." I wonder how hard that would be if I threw some of those nice body parts of yours across the Atlantic, right? It would have been more intriguing if he took certain steps where he was more willing to be threatening or violent. How would the JSA have reacted, especially when they were trying to build better heroes? That was just because that's the only time in this 13 or 14 part story where you did see that threatening aspect.
Yeah, that's true. That is interesting. And I'm with you. I thought that this story worked well in terms of the time when it came out, right after Infinite Crisis, like you said, because they've had this experience of an older Superman with gray temples coming from an alternate universe, and basically taking the current heroes to task for the world they've created. So yeah, their apprehension very much tracked, was very believable. I really liked the parallels between him and Power Girl. And your heart really breaks for Power Girl because she's in Infinite Crisis just lost the Superman of her Earth, of Earth 2, and then sees someone who could be the same person, related to that person. She doesn't know, but I like the kinship that they're able to find for both of them as people who survived the destructions of their world twice.
Universes.
Yeah. So I really like that. There's a lot of talk in these stories, again, about building better heroes and everything. And I feel like in a lot of instances, it's a little more tell than show. But I guess what really forces the issue is ultimately when the god Gog, not the man with the powers of Gog, but the actual Gog from the third world rises, right? And like you said, begins this walk across Africa, performing these seeming miracles. And there's a certain point where obviously we have certain members of the team who are more skeptical of this and others who go along with it a little bit more readily. But, Gog starts granting these wishes. I thought this was one of the most interesting aspects of this story when he grants these wishes specifically for members within the team. And you see, relatively quickly what a case of be careful what you wish for it can be, right? Like Sand. He has these nightmares. He's haunted by these nightmares. He can't sleep. They're horrific. He's witnessing all these gruesome crimes, but that's what allows him to ultimately solve them and find abducted children and others. And when he is cured of that and he's able to have a peaceful night's rest, it's like all those people who he would have saved are now lost. And you see a bunch of examples of this. Dr. Midnight, when he regains his sight,
and then he can't do surgery or he can't do the diagnosis that he was able to tap into when he was disabled. And then also you see how it expanded damage, the vanity, his profound sense of vanity. They explored that when Damage and Atom Smasher had the knockdown drag out. Be careful what you wish for. And then, Gog revitalized. He basically resurrected David Reed, Lance Corporal Reed, and made him Magog at the very, very end.
Yeah. And you feel, I think one of the things that I really did appreciate, I think that the story did well, was you feel this conflict within Kingdom Come Superman, right? So he spent 10 years hiding out on his world and he saw the consequences of that. So he comes here, right? And he doesn't want to take that same approach. And yet he's helpless as events unfold, just the way, that he knows, could lead to the same results that happened on his Earth with first Gog and then Magog. And maybe most importantly, this infighting within the team, like this idea of these superpowered beings fighting each other.
And now you get this schism.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think what adds to the dilemma is that we know where the Gog story ultimately goes, where he demands the worship, right? Everyone on your knees, and it's like, whoa. But prior to that, everything that he's doing, well, to a point, we'll talk about that, but most of what he's doing is positive. It's benevolent. So that disconnect, right, for Kingdom Come Superman, where it's like, I know, like we're dealing with these figures and these events that lead to such disastrous consequences, but it seems to be heading in a better path. Like I appreciated that dilemma that he was faced with, and I guess it's one of those things, like if you know and it's not even that he knows the future, right? He knows a future from his world, but he's on a different world. It's like, how do you reconcile all of that?
Yeah. I found it humorous super early when they lock him in the conference room and he hears the bolts click and all that. And, they're talking outside. Hey, the last time, an older Superman came here. But then, I found it humorous when Wildcat goes, hey, you guys do know he can hear us.
Yeah. And not only can he hear them, but he hears the young
girl
woman, right, who's going to commit suicide, and he lets himself out of the room that he's been imprisoned in, and he saves her. I liked, as far as the, obviously when we talk about these stories, we talk a lot about the Alex Ross art, and I love, again, whenever we had glimpses of the Kingdom Come world, it was his painted pages, but I really liked the Dale Eaglesham art in the regular issues, and I thought that there was such a gentle, the Kingdom Come Superman is an imposing figure, but there was this gentle calm to him. And even when he's sitting at the table, right, imprisoned and surrounded by all these heroes who are very wary of him, there was still this calm, although I guess you could also argue he was in the stages of grief as well, thinking that he just lost his entire world. So a lot swirling around, but I just in terms of the body language and the physicality as Dale Eaglesham depicted him, I really liked that.
Yeah, one other thing that struck me is, I forget where it was, there were a couple of interludes with Earth 22 Superman and New Earth Superman. And I thought they were well done. I do, but it disturbed me that one, I forget what issue it was, and it might have been the one I loved with the cover, where New Earth or Prime Superman goes, hey, are you spying on my wife? But they fight Hercules, right? And Hercules basically elbows and gives a bloody nose to New Earth Superman. And then he tries to slug Earth 22, and it means nothing because Earth 22 is so much stronger. He's processed so much solar radiation. It harkened back to that discussion we had about the Superman 2000 script. I was almost concerned that they made him so strong that there really wasn't anyone he could go toe-to-toe against or who would present a challenge to him. It was more philosophical, like you said. He's seeing the path be sown to the world that he wants to avoid. So it's more a perception and philosophical. But it did strike me that, well, there's really nobody that can give this guy a run for his money. It was reminiscent of the Superman 2000 script.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that specifically, but that's a good point. Well, speaking of his power, one of my favorite moments from one of the later issues, he punches a bolt of lightning, and it was great. And one of the characters is like, "Did you just punch lightning?" Like, yeah. So I thought that was cool.
I want to let you unpack this later, but I loved at the absolute end of the thing when there's a full page spread, and I think he's lifting Gog's head, and he compliments Cyclone, but it's also a reaffirmation of his own, the Superman I love, don't ever quit. Don't ever quit. And I think that was amplified because he came from a world where he had quit and had sowed this violence and this dissent. But the Superman I know would never quit, never surrender. So I love that that late in the story, that one, just after he punched the lightning, where he kind of, it reaffirms his own values, but he kind of gives a shout out to Cyclone.
Yeah, absolutely. That was such a powerful moment and works on a number of levels. But as far as what Superman would or wouldn't do, and you mentioned the Kingdom Come special that Alex Ross wrote and illustrated, where the Kingdom Come Superman speaks to Lois, our Lois, and tells her about the death of his Lois and the rest of the Daily Planet staff. And Bernie and I talked about this last week, but I want to get your take on it because I still remain somewhat conflicted on this. We get new information here because in Kingdom Come, we know that Lois dies at the hands of the Joker, and Superman brings Joker to justice. Magog kills Joker. Superman tries to bring Magog to justice, and he's acquitted. The people are on his side, right? And that ideological betrayal is what sends him into his decade of solitude that he gives up. But in the Kingdom Come special, that's part of Thy Kingdom Come, in that flashback, we see Lois dying, right? We get more time with them, and we see Lois dying, and Superman says to her, like, I'll find Joker, like, I'll hurt him, I'll make him pay.
Right.
And Lois makes him promise not to, like, hold on to who you are. And yeah.
Don't ever lose Clark. Right. I loved those words. Don't ever lose Clark. And it didn't register with him at all.
Right. It will when it's by the time we're done, right? It will, but in the moment it doesn't. But the question, this is what Bernie and I were talking about last time, and I want to get your take, especially since it's most relevant to Thy Kingdom Come, since that's where we see it. But Superman holding on to his ideals and not seeking vengeance in Kingdom Come after Lois dies, does it add to the story or take away from the story that we find out Lois kind of turned him around and had him make that promise? Because it adds another layer to it. You read Kingdom Come and it plays like, even though this horrific, unimaginable thing has happened, he's still not going to give in to hate and anger. But the Kingdom Come special adds this step of, well, no, he was, but Lois was able to pull him back. Do you like that? Do you like what that adds, or do you feel like that takes away from what was presented originally?
I like it. I think it adds to it. I think it shows his profound love for Lois and his humanity, that he can see, that he can't save her with his X-ray vision. He knows she's going to die. It shows his humanity, that he wants to hurt the person that killed her. And I'm more impressed where I just think for a moment Lois reminded him of who he was. I don't think he would have blazed off and just been like the injustice Superman. I think he probably would have still adhered to his values, but I like it that to me, of the entire thing, that Alex Ross Superman special, to me, was the high point. I think he did a great job conveying the love and the emotion between Earth 22 Lois and Superman, and her death was, I thought, just so emotionally powerful. But I did like it that she tries to tether his humanity to him, like, don't ever lose Clark. And I think he was just so emotionally distraught, it didn't register. And he did the very thing she didn't want. He abandoned Clark for at least 10 years. It was only, I guess, I forget what story, where Wonder Woman gives him the spectacles. Mm-hmm. But I was more impressed that Lois had to just kind of chide him into remembering who he was.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I sort of landed on the opposite side. I felt that it took away a little bit more than it gave, but I still remain conflicted on it. I mean, I think it's a very moving, powerful scene in and of itself. I guess in the context of what we already know from Kingdom Come, part of me feels like, don't touch that. But again, I get it, and I could see why you or others would like that. We talked about this divide within the team, within the Justice Society. And for the most part, most of the ones who side with Gog are the new generation, the newbies, right? Damage with his fixed face, Amazing Man, Judo Master, Wildcat Jr., Citizen Steel, who in this story, right, he wants to be able to feel again, and he's hoping that Gog will, grant him that wish. But among the old guard, Hawkman. I wanted to ask you that. Did that ring true to you? No.
No, I really figured if anyone's going to espouse freedom, and I know why they did what they did. They didn't want it to be, hey, all four of the old guard are all going to be on one side of the team. They had to mix it up a little bit. So I think Hawkman, the Hawkman that I read many times, who was effectively Conan with wings, right? Give him that mace and he'll fight anybody, and I did love in the earlier arcs all the fights with Black Adam. So that didn't ring true to me, the fact that he was on Gog's side. That didn't ring true, but I realized they had to do it. Otherwise, you'd have all the newbies on one side of the ledger and then all the old guard on the other. So they had to mix it up a little bit. And I think Hawkman was the expedient one.
I agree. The thing is, I was with it to a point. See, when Gog starts turning these soldiers who are killing civilians in Africa, he turns them to trees, right? Effectively killing them. I mean, makes them part of the earth, but they're dead. And that within that divide, I understood Hawkman's position as more of the warrior and someone who, is willing to take it that step further, when he feels there's no other choice or it's justified. So in that sense, the fact that Hawkman was more okay with that sort of solution, that rang true to me. But the idea that he would be following around this god and going along with all of this, that's where I felt like this does not feel like Hawkman to me.
I wholeheartedly agree. I agree with both comments you made. You can rationalize that his protection of people, even in ancient Egypt, his sense of responsibility to protect his people. So I can understand why for the evil soldiers, he reaches the conclusion. But for him to be in Gog's thrall, that didn't ring true to me. I just think, they didn't want to have all four of the old guard on the same side of the ledger.
For sure. So I said earlier that the story went on for a while, and I do feel like there was more, the setup was kind of better than the payoff. But I guess that's a question. I wanted to ask you this. We have issue after issue of Gog walking the earth, performing these miracles, seemingly benevolent actions that he's taken, causing this rift within the team. And, I think the Hawkman of it aside, you can see why certain members of the team, particularly those who wanted their wishes granted or still want to have their wishes granted, would go along with it. I think for the most part, it tracks why you would have this sort of split versus those who are more skeptical and can kind of see through a bit and maybe see where this is going. But we really get to this big payoff where, again, Gog now demands worship. And now this really brings everything to a head. And most of those who had been on Gog's side now switch over. But, I mean, was the payoff worth it, I guess, for you reading it? Were you like, man, that was worth all those issues leading up to it? Or was it sort of just like, I don't know that it was worth all the buildup?
More the latter. I know they had to resolve it, right? I don't know what else they could have done. So while I'm being critical, I don't have an answer for an alternative. And I had to say that with respect to the creators. But to me, Gog was kind of a one-hit wonder, right? I mean, his purpose was, again, I'm convinced Alex Ross wanted to tell another Earth 22 Superman story, but did not want to alter or undo anything contradictory to the original. So it was kind of perfunctory at the end. I do think one thing that I think was a missed opportunity was very early on, they had Infinity Man fight, I think, Gog, the missionary Gog. But he was only there like 2 pages. And I'll tell you, I think what a missed opportunity, because here you had Gog come from the third world. And Infinity Man, I can remember, Anthony, when I was like 14 years old, I bought the Forever People, the very first issue. And I was just kind of like, wow, who is this guy? I mean, Infinity Man, he was kind of this amalgam of the Billy Batson Captain Marvel thing, the younger super gods kind of, they vanish and he appears. But Infinity Man was Darkseid's older brother, and he was somebody that could go toe-to-toe with Superman, no questions asked. So I thought, wow, that would have been intriguing had Infinity Man had interaction, say, with Alan Scott or some of the other characters, or Power Girl or something like that. I thought that was just a too brief, like a little vignette, and then he was gone.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's one of the pitfalls and drawbacks of having such a sprawling cast, is that you just don't have as much real estate. Because I agree with you. I think when I think of what I consider missed opportunities in this story. I think it is, wanting to see more combinations and different interactions. And it's funny because there were any time we spent a few pages either introducing or getting reacquainted with an existing character, in almost every instance, I wanted more. Like when we spent those few pages with Sand dealing with these nightmares and, drinking all these pots of coffee over, at night to stay awake because he's haunted by these nightmares and he's working these cases. It's like, well, I would read a whole issue with this.
Yeah, Anthony, that was the second biggest thing that I loved the most, what they did with Sandy Hawkins. And there was, Eaglesham nailed it. There was like, I forget the backdrop, but I think Power Girl was going to ask Sandy Hawkins to help her. And they show him in his room with all these pots of coffee and a chessboard and books and music. And he's doing everything he can to distract himself, keep himself awake, so he doesn't go into these horrible nightmares. And like you said, it had to just make him feel so horrible seeing, whatever it was on a telepathic level that those guys conveyed their ideas to him, the villains and the murderers. But I thought the artwork was powerful there, where it showed his profound aversion to going to sleep, the pots of coffee and all the distractions. I thought that was well done. I'm sorry, I got to say this, and I want to get your reaction. And I know we're not doing this in a linear fashion.
Yeah, nobody said we had to. It's all right.
Okay. But what amazed me, and I want your feedback on this, what amazed me was, like you said, there was that one point where God turns the violent soldiers into trees, right? What I don't understand was, how did the entire JSA and Superman fight him? Like, he can make Sand go to sleep at the snap of the fingers. He couldn't do something to he sends Power Girl to another universe. He couldn't do something to slow these guys down. I attributed to that was maybe he was so connected to the Earth that it hindered his ability to do some of the instantaneous changes that he did earlier in the series. But it just amazed me that he didn't make any of the JSAs go to sleep or transplant them or transport them somewhere else.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think that is ultimately probably a bit of a cheat, but I like your rationale that as he bonds more with the Earth, and that's what Sand uncovers, right? Because he's also, in addition to these these nightmares, he's also a geomorph, and he's connected to the Earth, right? And he's able to recognize the symbiotic relationship
which is a very unusual skill set.
It's quite the power set. So so maybe there's something to that effect. I guess, one thing with Kingdom Come Superman, like I said, I think he comes in with this desire to act and to stop events from unfolding the way they have, and instantly runs into this dilemma because the right figures are in play, but again, things are playing out somewhat differently, and Gog seems to be benevolent and all that. I guess, do you ultimately feel that Superman, like there was enough for Superman to do? And because we're talking about all this action, right? Do you ultimately feel like there was enough for him to do? I mean, we talked about that moment where he, says to Cyclone, "Don't ever give up," and that's a very powerful moment. And he is able to get through to Lance Corporal Reed after he's become Magog and show him, look at what these wishes have done to everyone. So he does have those moments, and of course, he and Starman are the ones who ultimately take Gog through one of the black holes and imprison him on the source wall. Right. So he does have things to do. I guess, do you feel like it was enough? Because again, I just keep coming back to this thing where I felt like there was a lot of telling and not as much showing in the story as I would have liked.
Yeah, that was one of my disappointments because, again, my love of the older Superman with the graying temples, my love of that character. And it wasn't so much Infinite Crisis. It was more really Crisis on Infinite Earths. If I may, in some ways it would have been super intriguing if Gog had sent Power Girl and Superman to the Earth too. Because my disappointment was, a lot of it was you had to read into how he was processing things. And he was being very patient. And like the one time, like I'm repeating myself, when he confronted Magog in the brownstone, and Magog is, I've never felt better, right? Or you can see the trepidation and the nervousness, like, holy cow, I'm seeing history repeat itself. But it was more observing. I did like the scene, quite frankly, where there was like a 2-page spread where he had a one-on-one with Wonder Woman, and he kind of counseled. He's telling her, "Geez, don't succumb to being militant. Keep the sword in the scabbard." And it just kind of rolled off her back. But he was trying to do things, I think, to help keep the environment or the whole thing going in the right direction. But I got disappointed with him just standing around so much.
Yeah, but it's fine. I mean, I do appreciate those other examples you gave. I mean, in total, maybe there's enough there that we can sort of say he took the actions that he needed to.
It was interesting how Starman and Superman were the bookends.
Yeah.
Because at the very, 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 very beginning, when Starman creates that portal to get rid of Goth, it's just Starman and Superman on that last page. He's carrying Starman out. And then at the absolute end, Superman goes, you know what? I am going to go back to my world. Whatever it is, I'm going back. And he asked Starman to say goodbye. So they bookended it with those two characters. And I thought that was kind of a nice synergy. I did like the occasional appearances of the Green Knight. There were a few panels where Alan did get into the Earth 2 armor. I thought that was well done, but it was infrequent. One thing, Anthony, I want to get your thoughts on. One thing I really expected, knowing Ross's appreciation of religion, and it was super prevalent in many of the titles, I did expect to see at least a page where the Spectre might appear, and there might be an explanation for why he wasn't a participant in the story, something that precluded him or prevented him from taking action. So from about midpoint on, I expected to see some panel with the Spectre kind of observing all this and not really sure what to do. So I thought that was another lost opportunity. In addition to Infinity Man, I thought, geez, you could have done something and explained why the Spectre wasn't part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, especially given the Spectre's affiliation with the JSA, yeah, that does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity. I wonder why that wasn't even addressed, especially since, like we said, the story ran for so long. It feels like there might have been a place somewhere for it. So yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I would be curious to know what went into that. Especially
given that Jim Corrigan and was it Norman McKay? Am I doing his name right? The pastor. They had a lot of discussion and dialogue in Kingdom Come. And Norman McKay did make appearances here in that Superman special. But from about midpoint on, I expected to see the Spectre, I don't know, looking down from the astral plane or just kind of making a comment and going, well, maybe I'll step in if I have to. Given how the Spectre is one of the few speaking characters in Kingdom Come, so I expected to see at least an appearance of him in this story.
Right. Rich, I feel like you should do your own fan fiction here with your take on the story, because there's a lot. I mean, a lot of the things you're proposing, I'm not that so much, but like him and Power Girl going to Earth 2. I mean, very different directions for this. So, going back to our earlier question about expectations and missed opportunities, it seems like the story missed more than it hit for you. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, please, I don't want you to think like I'm going to go down to my garage tonight and take an axe and chop up the 3 trades. I'm really glad I read this. I read it more out of respect for you because you always raise the level of play. So I'm very happy that I took the time to study this and analyze it, because it didn't do it for me when this story first came out. But yeah, I think it had some great moments. I really do think it had some really great moments. But I think they hurt themselves by making it too constraining. I think there was a number of opportunities where they could have taken in different directions. So because they were so careful, they really couldn't do anything to the Earth 22 Superman. They had to put the toys back in the toy box at the very end in the exact same way. So in a sad fashion, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities. And I don't think this story holds up as well as stories from, say, 10 years earlier about the Justice Society.
Sure. Well, actually, so you've talked a couple of times now about putting the toys back in the box, and I agree. And I think Alex Ross even acknowledged this in some of the supplementary material. There's a sketchbook and things like that in the trades. And I think one of the things I read, did cite exactly what you just said about not wanting, this is a follow up in a number of respects, but not a direct sequel and not reopening, right? The intention, the idea was always that still those 4 issues of Kingdom Come stand by themselves, right? As a wholly intact story. So I agree with you. I mean, I think we get to the end of this and he's put back where he needs to be. But I guess maybe it's like a 2-part question. Is there any, and we see, once he goes back to his Earth, we see, sort of a montage of scenes from Kingdom Come, and then beyond, we get some new moments as well. But so we see that things are now, he's back and things are unfolding the way we know them from Kingdom Come. And then we go a little bit further and we see him in the far future. But I guess one question is, are there any aspects of those final moments where you think to yourself, oh, this colors the original Kingdom Come differently? Like I have a different understanding of why he does this now because of the adventures that he had with the Justice Society. Like when Wonder Woman gives him the glasses and he puts them on, do you feel like, well, he's more receptive to that now because we know the conversation that he had with Our Earth's Lois, and she asked him, what did Lois mean by don't lose Clark? And so that's kind of been in his mind. Like, I guess, did it color any of those Kingdom Come scenes differently now that you know this adventure that he had?
Boy, Anthony, my misgiving is I have not reread Kingdom Come in a while.
No, but even just like in terms of, I understand, but even just in terms of what they give us in Thy Kingdom Come, the fact that when he returns to his Earth, he sees so many of the people around him dead from this nuclear fallout, and he goes to the world leaders and he's on a rampage.
Yeah. If anything, it makes it, this is where I compliment Ross for the artwork, because when he is reactivated in his universe and he goes back to that exact moment, and he sees the nuclear desolation and the dead bodies, he goes right to the UN, and he's set to kick ass. And Norman McKay has to talk him down and go, look, you're the very thing that terrifies people. Your willingness to be this violent. You're terrifying humanity. That's why they launched the bomb. So I compliment Ross, because when Superman gets up and sees the devastation and the desolation and the death, that's how he reacts. I would have expected him to be a little bit more thoughtful, though, based on his experiences in Thy Kingdom Come. It might have tempered his reaction. Now, maybe it's just he's so overwhelmed by the devastation. But, Anthony, I truly think Kingdom Come stands so... I did love maybe that those 2 pages where Superman got to cradle Lois as she was dying, and he's so just destroyed. That would have been intriguing if those pages were part of Kingdom Come. But absent that, I really didn't see anything that from Thy Kingdom Come that influenced Kingdom Come.
Right. Which, and I guess this is where, you get differing opinions, because part of me feels like, I agree, you don't want to really touch Kingdom Come. You want to maintain the integrity of that story. But then part of me also feels like, well, what was the point of all of this?
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, they were walking such a fine line. Like you said, and you said it, you reminded me, yeah, I think there was some bonus material and some sketches. And you reminded me, I think Ross did say, I don't want to do anything that would undo or alter or tweak the original. So they really kind of painted themselves into a corner. They really couldn't change the character. Again, you talk about Rich Roney fan fiction. It might have been intriguing if he came to Prime Earth or New Earth and he had amnesia or something. Now, granted, he was demoralized and disillusioned and disoriented. I get that. And he was processing the death of his world. But I really didn't see any character development, you know?
Mm. Do you wish, because I wonder about this myself, do you wish that he had been able to stick around and just be a part of the team, not in a Thy Kingdom Come story that's dealing with Gog and Magog and all of that, but if he had just been part of the team for a few arcs? Like, do you wish that he had stuck around longer?
I do, but they would have had to really come up with some great environments where they could challenge him. Because again, I'm conscious of the fact that he's so powerful. Like, you know, here you got Hercules that gave the younger Superman a bloody nose, and he couldn't do anything to the older Superman. And even like when he goes in there and they spray the kryptonite gas, he goes, wrong Superman. So my apprehension is they made him too powerful, unless they did something where they say thrust him on Apocalypse, or had him fight Mongol or something like that. It would have been intriguing if they kept him around for a few arcs, and there were a smaller number of individuals that he interacted with.
Right. Well, I mean, what you're describing is very close to the current Warworld saga, you know, in Action Comics. That idea of a little bit older, the White Walls, fighting Mongol. Interesting. You mentioned faith, and Bernie and I had a really great discussion about that last week about, again, faith in the DC universe and what Superman's faith might be and all of that. I think one of the things that I appreciated most about this was the Mr. Terrific of it all, because he, you know, famously doesn't believe. And, you know, it was heartbreaking, because when we go to Earth 2, we see that world's Mr. Terrific, you know, his life took a very different path. His wife lived. She survived the accident that our Mr. Terrific's wife succumbed to. And that Mr. Terrific becomes a man of faith. And it's such a stark contrast to our Mr. Terrific. And there's, you know, a very interesting moment where Gog will not even acknowledge Mr. Terrific.
Yeah. Good point.
You know?
Good point.
And then you mentioned Norman McKay. I did feel a little bad for our Earth's Norman McKay, because I feel like Kingdom Come Superman's putting a lot on him. He's like, listen, that's a different guy. But it's still the same. Again, you know, as far as the echoes of Kingdom Come, I mean, the last thing our Norman says to Kingdom Come Superman is, you know, he's like, I hesitate, you know, I don't mean to like talk so simply to you, but it sounds like you really need to forgive yourself. And then that's, of course, what Kingdom Come Norman McKay says, you know, in the big climax with, you know, when Superman's on his rampage. So, yeah, you know, I appreciate those echoes. But yeah, it was kind of funny. I felt a little bad for our Norman.
Yeah. I mean, Anthony, I was pondering this. You said this about 10 minutes ago. My misgiving is Superman, I think, because he was so powerful. In many, many, many respects, he was constrained to be an observer. I mean, other than helping Judo Master in that early thing, and then really being the solution at the very end, taking Gog's head and going to the source wall, you really didn't see him engage in his, you know, he saved the girl that was contemplating suicide and jumped off the roof. But I didn't see him really use his powers a lot, or fight villains, or he kind of seemed to be hanging out with the JSA and just observing what was transpiring.
Well, but I guess maybe that's part of the point with this version of the, like, he's not there necessarily for fisticuffs, but he's there. And maybe you can even argue, and maybe I'm being too generous, I don't know, but maybe you can even argue that just his presence alone and his, you know, he does come with warnings and information, right? So he is trying to steer them. And I might be pinning too much on this one moment, but I really feel like when he's able to get through to Magog, when he's able to like grab him and be like, look what Gog has done. I do think that's definitely a standout moment. Again, you're talking about a pretty long, a long story to get there. But yeah, maybe it's just the presence alone, maybe the warning that he comes with, because I guess that's the thing too. It does, like I said, thematically, it really does all tie together, because the Justice Society already has this mission We have to train the next generation. And then he shows up and he's like, yeah, if you don't, it gets real bad.
Boy, that's a great point. That's a great point. No, that's a great point.
So I feel like that really solidifies everything, and it does sort of, bring things to the forefront and force certain issues, especially when we get to that splinter within the team. So I'm coming around even a little bit more on this.
No, I that is a good point. I will say, I truly think, I do feel bad. I do think they set Magog up for failure. I hate to say it. I mean, I did, like I said much earlier in the conversation, I did get confused between the missionary Gog and then the god Gog from the third world and then Magog. But I know that he had his own series for I don't know how many issues, 10, 12 issues or something. Magog, he had his own series. But I think the poor guy was set up for failure because he had this villain's costume his entire tenure. And I remember all the stuff like, hey, he's a special legacy character. We really got to bring him in because he's FDR's grandson. But it was unfulfilled potential. I mean, he looked so violent. I think they set him up for failure.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, as far as the, kind of keeping the character straight, I mean, Gog is the god from the third world, right? The source of this power. And then that's what William Matthews, the missionary, is I guess, able to tap into. And that allows him to take on the guise of Gog. And then the real Gog, essentially, the god, absorbs him and then begins that walk and then creates Magog. We talked a little bit about the biblical implications last week of Gog and Magog, and I haven't learned much more other than, Dr. Midnight addresses that in this story. Sometimes they're referred to as people, sometimes places in the Bible, and it's not just Christianity. It's a number of religions have these Gog and Magog.
Really?
Yeah. So
I do remember, like, there was a panel where Dr. Midnight said his studies of Catholicism helped him explain the Gog-Magog relationship.
Yeah.
And you nailed it. You said it so well. Yeah, Hey, you had William Matthews somehow tap into Gog's power and be the first Gog. Then you had the god from the third world who begat Magog. But I think poor Magog was set up, unless they changed his costume in some way. He just looked like a villain all the time. So that poor guy with his lance and his horns, I just think they set him up for failure.
Yeah, I've never read any of that. I would be curious to check it out. It's funny because it took a second when you said that for it to even ring a bell with me. I'll have to take a look at that. But you mentioned how we do see Alan Scott in the Kingdom Come armor at a certain point. Yeah, and I feel like there was a period of time, I guess, really right around this time between this and Roy Harper becoming Red Arrow and Tim Drake becoming Red Robin. Like, it felt like there were a few steps towards maybe incorporating elements from Kingdom Come. Not that Kingdom Come is the future of the DC universe, but it's at least a potential future, and it's something that maybe you would see some steps building towards that. I don't know. I guess would you hope to see more of Kingdom Come elements in modern day DCU, or do you think it sort of should stay where it is?
Boy, that's interesting. Well, Anthony, I apologize to your listeners. My love and enthusiasm for comics at present is really not there. I mean, I'm not buying the way I once did. I don't know. I mean, I would be reluctant if they took an element of Kingdom Come and they made it continuity now, because I think that's kind of a foreordained conclusion. I'd rather let the story evolve in a certain way, but if they could do something where they tap into like Red Arrow or something like that and make it more organic in our Earth or something like that, I'd be for it.
Right on. So is there anything, I have a couple more just general JSA questions for you, but as far as the Thy Kingdom Come, is there anything else that you wanted to say about it, or anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
Give me a second to check my notes. I truly think we covered this so well. The only thing I will say that, and this is a small annoyance, it's a small annoyance, and it's trivial, but I was very disappointed when Damage destroyed Al Pratt's home, and all the family memorabilia and the records and stuff like that. And I say that kind of from a personal level, only because this past January, we went back into being homebound. They didn't let my company didn't let us come in for the month of January. So I used a couple of weekends to really clean out a bunch of material that I had moved out of my mother's apartment after she died. And I found this small box of a whole bunch of my father's records from World War II. I found his dog tags. I found one of his diaries and journals, and some of the trips he took, in 1942, where he had to go overseas and stuff like that. And it fascinated me. So I was very disappointed when Damage completely destroyed Al Pratt's home, because at one point in the living room they showed where Adam Smasher brought out all the memorabilia and some of the tapes and films and stuff like that. So I thought that was, obviously it's not going to move the needle on the story. I think, candidly, if I may, it would have been much more interesting if Earth 22 Superman tried to speak to Damage and steer him back to the right path, as opposed to Adam Smasher trying to kick the snot out of him.
Yes, I agree. Although, it's funny because as the wheels are turning, and I feel like, okay, let me see if I can lay this out, because I think in Kingdom Come, it's not just the inaction. We do have that decade where he's abdicated, but then when he comes back, he overcorrects and he tries to impose his will on the people and round up and imprison the superpower beings who don't go along with it. And that's not a tenable solution or situation, right? So
pendulum goes too far.
Right. So maybe, because, we're talking about, does he do enough in this story? And maybe part of that role of observer is that, again, he's been down that other path too. So maybe it's more being present, just being there and just being an example rather than, and again, he does issue his warnings and he has some things to do, but I think that might account for a lot of this.
Point. That's a very good point. That helps me reason why he's kind of more an observer and he's not leading the fight. That's a great point, because he did see the consequences of overreacting when he tried to impose his will and they did the gulag and stuff like that. Thank you. That's a good point.
Yeah. So again, as far as follow-ups to Kingdom Come, there aren't many, and probably rightfully so. And we've seen instances where, we do sort of reopen that box to varying degrees of success. I think Thy Kingdom Come overall works more for me than it doesn't. And I think it's a solid story in and of itself that does still maintain the integrity of Kingdom Come in a way that, and I don't mean to dump all over the kingdom, but that one is, you sort of put a little asterisk next to it. And I don't know that you do for Thy Kingdom Come. I think it stands, I think it earns its place as a follow-up to the story. At the same time, I don't know that I need to see more follow-ups. I feel like, that Kingdom Come really does work unto itself. And I do think the law of diminishing returns is at play here. Like, I don't know how much more mileage we can necessarily get out of that particular story and that iteration of Superman.
Well said. Well said. And Anthony, this is something I'd say easily for the last 10 years I've always admired. One of your observations is kind of like, hey, you need to know when to get off the stage. You've spoken about how in some ways British television, they're not going to do an unending serial. There's going to have a story. It's going to be 13 episodes, beginning, middle, end. So that's a good point. It's so good, you're only going to do something that might diminish the value of the original by tinkering with it too much.
Yeah, exactly. So at the same time, such a popular property and character and version of the story that I'm sure at some point we'll get something else. But if we don't, I think I would be perfectly fine with that. Before we go, I want to just ask, as far as the Justice Society for you generally, specifically adaptations, we've had the JSA on Smallville back in season 9. There was a recent animated movie I don't think you saw. I've actually not seen it myself either. I think it was called World War II, but there was that. We have the forthcoming Black Adam movie that will feature Hawkman and Dr. Fate, and there's been some little teaser trailers that have been put out with that. There's the Stargirl TV series. As far as adaptations, I mean, what have you enjoyed the most JSA wise, or most looking forward to?
I am looking forward to Black Adam. I don't know where it's going to go. I did watch season 1 of Stargirl and enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. But there was nothing that's really captured my interest. To me, candidly, some of the Len Straczynski run with Mike Parobeck, I think very highly of. The Paul Levitz run in the 70s, I think very highly of. And I think super highly of the Goyer, Robinson, Geoff Johns run. And Geoff Johns was the constant. Those are the 3 things I've enjoyed the most. Some of the Roy Thomas stuff from the 80s doesn't really, in my eyes, doesn't really stand the test of time. Going to feature films or animated or television, I'm really lukewarm and indifferent. I don't have a passion like, oh, I gotta see this.
All right, fair enough. All right, well, listen, thank you very much for taking part in this. It was great to compare notes on Thy Kingdom Come.
Listen, I thank you. You offered a few things that made me appreciate this more. So I'm incrementally a little bit more positive than I was, say, at the beginning of this discussion.
Right on. Well, thank you, Rich. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure that you come back in 1 week. Next time, we're going to be talking about the role of Superman as government stooge, as depicted in DC The New Frontier and the Dark Knight universe. It'll be a really interesting one, so don't miss it. And until then, remember, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. The spin-off podcast, Digging for Justice, a DC fan journey, is available now exclusively at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato, starting at the $1 level. New episodes release monthly, and many more rewards are available too, including a robust back catalog of bonus podcasts. Thank you to all patrons for enabling me to produce this show.